Good evening. We are back to chapter 4 of the Spirit's book. This is the last item. Chapter 4, it talks about multiple lives. And the last item is innate ideas, which are ideas that we bring with us on our new existence. Addresses a little bit more the idea of reincarnation and our evolutionary path on our eternal journey. So, Philip, can you start, please? 218.
Does a spirit preserve any trace of the thoughts and ideas it had or the knowledge it acquired in past lives? It retains a vague memory, which gives the spirit what you call innate ideas. So the theory of innate ideas is not pure fantasy. No, the knowledge acquired in each life is not lost. When a spirit is freed from the material body, it always remembers what it has learned. It may forget this knowledge partially or temporarily when it reincarnates. However, the dormant intuition that it maintains helps it advance. If this intuition did not exist, the spirit would always have to begin its education from scratch. In a new life, a spirit picks up from the point at which it had left at the end of its previous life. If that is the case, there must be a very close connection between two consecutive lives. That connection is not always as close as you may think, since the conditions of the two lives are often very different, and the spirit may have made considerable progress in the interval between them.
Okay. So first, the spirits explain here what we call innate ideas. It's the memories, a vague memory, the intuition, the impression, a little bit of everything that it preserves from previous existences. The spirits tells us that everything that we have acquired, that the knowledge acquired in each life is not lost. Meaning, if we have acquired certain knowledge, certain evolution, certain intellectual progress, let's say, we are not going to lose it. Now, it does not guarantee that we bring it to the existence that this new existence that we are living in. So we know that we discussed this, that we bring the moral evolution always with us, but the intellectual evolution, sometimes we don't bring it for different reasons. So the last part, Kardec asks the spirits that if indeed there is a close connection between two consecutive lives, and here the spirits bring the idea of our learning, our progress in between lives. And studying the books of André Luiz, we know that we can progress. We can progress in the spiritual world as much as we can in terms of what lacks there is to put in practice what we have learned. That only happens when we come to a new physical existence. Okay. So the Spirit tells us if we didn't bring this idea of this previous knowledge, this intuition, this dormant intuition, we would have to start always from scratch. And we see amongst different children different degrees of knowledge or ability to learn fast, or you give the example of the very early geniuses of arts, of mathematics, of some other things, that if we start everything from the present life, how could we explain that? But we're going to talk a little bit more about that later in this item. Okay. Any comments, questions here? Okay.
219. What is the origin of the extraordinary faculties of individuals who appear to intuitively possess certain fields of knowledge, such as languages, mathematics, and so on, without any formal education? The vague recollection of their past, the result of progress previously made by the soul, but of which it has no present consciousness. From where else could that intuition originate? A spirit may change its body or shell, but it remains the same.
Okay. So here, the spirits answer directly why some people have these extraordinary faculties showing from an early age. In this case, Kardec asks about languages, mathematics, and the spirits tells us it's really what we bring from previous incarnations, the vague recollection, the result of progress previously made. We have to understand that as we are evolving, humanity is evolving also. So the knowledge, the ability to, let's talk about scientific abilities that we bring from our past, humanity evolves also. So when we come here, we have the facility to learn and to absorb all this new technology, these new innovations. But we are learning because we didn't have that in the previous incarnation. So that's also important to remember. So when we see young children playing with electronic machines and being so able, and it seems very easy to them, their previous incarnation, they didn't have the machines. They may have learned a little bit in the spiritual world and contact with the physical world, but it is a new learning for them. But because of previous knowledge and abilities, it looks much easier, and it comes much easier to them than to everyone else, to the older generation, let's say. Of course, when you are younger, it's easier to learn. It's easier to absorb new knowledge, right? It is said that a baby up to 3 years you acquire as much knowledge as you have on the next, I don't know, 30, 50 years, something like that. The amount of information you receive from the moment you are born until you start talking, walking, and everything is it's staggering. So of course they have you add that all these new things that are around them, and they have the ability and the facility to deal with it. But you always have to take into account what we bring from previous incarnations that will help us move easier in one area or another. Okay. Comments, questions? No? Okay. Last one.
Are the instinctive knowledge of God's existence?
Oh, sorry, I jumped one.
Yeah.
220. Yeah, sorry. And it's an important one, actually.
Can we lose certain intellectual faculties when we change our bodies, such as an interest in the arts? Yes, if you have tarnished that faculty or made bad use of it. An intellectual faculty may also lie dormant for an entire existence because the spirit chooses to exercise another faculty that is completely unrelated to the latent ability. However, it will come into play in a future life.
Okay. So here is the answer why we don't bring all our intellectual faculties when we come to a new incarnation. It may be that we abuse that faculty, we use that intellectual faculty to take advantage of others, or that we have to leave it dormant in an incarnation. It's not that we lose it. We don't bring the ability so we can develop in other direction. You know, the example that I always bring is the one of Mozart, right? One of the biggest music genius that we had in humanity. If he comes in the following incarnation with the same music geniality that he had, that will be all his life. He will go back to music and composing, and because it's the easy path. So his musical abilities have to be dormant in a new incarnation for him to develop, let's say, on other fields, on the scientific field, on the medical field, on the charitable field, anything. So this, when it says the spirit chooses, if the spirit has the ability to choose, they will choose. If they don't have the ability to choose because they are not participating in the reincarnation planning, they won't choose, but the supervisors, the spirits that are in charge of the incarnation will choose for them, okay? And it's a very important concept that we have to understand here, because that's one thing that it's always raises question when we talk about the two wings of evolution, the moral evolution and intellectual evolution. The moral evolution is always with us. Once you become part of you, you know, once you become patient, the example we always use, you always be patient. You don't lose your patience. Now, the intellectual abilities, because you have to move in thousands of different directions, if you really have mastered one area, it's more productive for you not to bring it to a new incarnation so you can develop other abilities. Again, we're talking about spirits at our level of evolution, because of course, a more evolved spirit that has the ability to compartmentalize and understand what it needs, it can bring the intellectual abilities knowing that it's not going to use it because it needs to develop in other areas. But at our level of evolution, we are, let's say, lazy. If I'm a genius in music and I come again in a new incarnation with my musical abilities, I'm going to live off music again for sure, because it's the easy path. So it's important to understand why this is these abilities may lie dormant in the new incarnation. Okay. Okay. Questions, comments here? Nothing. All right.
221. Are the instinctive knowledge of God's existence and the intuition of a future life due to retrospective memory, which appears to be natural to human beings, even savages? Yes. It is a memory that a person maintains of what they knew as a spirit before reincarnation, but pride often stifles this feeling. Our beliefs that are similar to spiritism found across all nations due to this memory. The principles contained in spiritism are as old as time itself and are consequently found everywhere. Incarnate spirits maintain the intuition of their time as a spirit and possess an instinctive consciousness of the spirit world. Still, this intuition is often tainted by prejudices, ignorance, and superstition.
Okay, now let's talk about the intuition of God's existence or knowledge of God's existence, and the intuition or knowledge of the survival of the soul and of reincarnation. First, we are moving away from the word savages. I was going to correct and I forgot. It's primitive people. So we find that the instinctive knowledge of God in all existence of humanity, right? You go to the primitive people and they are adoring what they call gods in the rain, in the thunder, in the sun. You go to primitive civilizations a little bit more evolved, and you find individuals having this knowledge of a god or multiple gods, because they used to call spirits that appear to them as gods. So we bring this in our intuition. That's why the vast majority of humankind has some form of spirituality, because you would think that with almost 200 years of scientific evolvement, with bombardment of anti-religion discussions, and with the questioning of religions, you would have less than between 70 and 80% of the population of the world that still considers themselves spiritual in some sense. If you believe in the survival of the soul in any form or way, you are a spiritualist. So everyone that belongs to any religion in the world, or even if you don't belong to any religion, but you believe in the survival of the soul after death, you are a spiritual person. And how come you have such a large number of people? Because again, we bring this within ourselves. It's when we rationalize that we stop believing in God or stop believing in these things. So it's something that when we start to think about it, nobody's born materialist. Nobody's born believing that there is nothing after this life. It is something that as you reach a certain age, you start questioning what you see around you, and you start doubting the existence of God or the survival of the soul for different reasons. So, like the Spirit says here, this intuition is often tainted by prejudices, ignorance, and superstition. And again, it's understandable if you don't have reasonable explanations for what's happening around you, and you start rationalizing everything that happens on earth and the so-called injustices, and you start questioning God, unless you are very the very fervorous religious people that follow almost blindly the teachings of their own religions. So we bring that from the spiritual world. We were there. So when we come here, if we don't, in societies that embrace it, like some Eastern societies, it's only natural that you continue developing this sense of spirituality, and you believe in the survival of the soul in some form or shape. It's more on the more so-called civilized or more prosperous countries that you find the resistance against the spirituality. it's very interesting, and I mentioned this more than once, right? That the Soviet Union, since it was formed in 1918 until it was dismantled in 1990, had always fought against religion, had prohibited or tried to impose non-religious beliefs to the population. So population in the former Soviet Union countries, Russia and the other countries, were almost forbidden to have any spirituality. And by the end of the regime, and when the region became a little more freer, they did a research how many people did not believe in God. And it was almost the same number as the United States, a little bit more, but almost the same number. So you have 60 years, 70 years of oppression on spirituality, but it doesn't work because it's innate in us, like the title of this item. Okay, this is the last of the chapter. If anyone has any questions, comments here. Okay, everyone is comfortable with the idea, right? So we move on to chapter 5. Chapter 5, it's not, it was not written by the spirits, it was written by Kardec. It's called Considerations on Multiple Lives. So chapter 4 was multiple lives, and we went through the process of reincarnation. Chapter 5, we have eight pages written by Kardec, where he talks about the reincarnation and the logic of reincarnation according to the ideas that he has, trying to, and you see through his comments, trying to not take into consideration what the spirit says, just using logic on base of philosophical reasoning and comparisons between alternatives. It's very well written and very interesting. Of course, we're not going to read 8.5 pages because it's a little bit too much. We're going to do like we do with the study of the books. We read a little bit and we stop and we comment. Okay? So, Philip.
222. Some people object to the dogma of reincarnation as not new and merely a revival of Pythagoras' theory. We have never claimed that Spiritism was a modern invention. On the contrary, it is a result of natural law. Therefore, it must have existed since the beginning of time, and we have always striven to prove that traces of it are found in the earliest chronicles of antiquity. Pythagoras was not the author of metempsychosis, but borrowed it from Indian and Egyptian philosophers who had already maintained this theory for ages. The idea of soul transmigration was a widespread belief admitted by the most eminent thinkers of that time. Where did this idea come from? Through revelation and intuition. We do not know, but it may be safely assumed that no concept could have survived ages and commanded the respect of the most esteemed members of the human race if it had not been based on some solid ground of truth and reason. The ancient roots of this doctrine should therefore be considered an argument in its favor rather than an objection. At the same time, it must not be forgotten that there is a fundamental difference between the antique doctrine of metempsychosis and the modern doctrine of reincarnation, namely that the spirits who teach the latter categorically reject the idea that the human soul can be embodied by an animal and vice versa. The spirits who now teach the dogma of multiple corporal lives reaffirm a theory that was born in the earliest ages of history and that has maintained a position of importance up to the present day for a vast majority of people. However, they present this dogma in a manner that is more rational, more compliant with the natural law of progress, and more in harmony with the wisdom of the Creator by stripping away the embellishments and exaggerations added by superstition. A circumstance worthy of note is the fact that it is not in this book alone that the doctrine in question has been instructed in recent years. Even before its release, numerous publications of a similar nature had already been circulated in various countries, and their number has greatly increased since. Here we may ask, why is it that the statements of all spirits are not in agreement? We will revisit this matter later.
Okay, so as I said, Kardec is talking, is making his considerations on multiple lives. And again, it's important to remember that Spiritism didn't bring anything new. Spiritism didn't invent reincarnation, didn't invent mediumship. All of these notions that Spiritism brought, what Spiritism brought was the study and the understanding of the laws that rule reincarnation and mediumship. Here we're talking about reincarnation. So first, Kardec tells us that what Spiritism is doing is merely doing a revival of Pythagoras' theory. Actually, Pythagoras was not the one that brought the idea of reincarnation. He was the one that made it more popular in ancient Greece. But we'll talk about metempsychosis a little bit. So what Kardec says here is, first thing, Spiritism is not inventing it. He's saying that reincarnation have existed since the beginning of time, the notions of reincarnation. Metempsychosis in philosophy refers to the transmigration of the soul, especially its reincarnation after death. Generally, the term is derived from the context of ancient Greek philosophy, and the term, so nowadays, scholars think that the term transmigration is more appropriate. And it's been used, and you'll find in the modern literature, in James Joyce Ulysses, in Nietzsche. But the difference between reincarnation as we understand in Spiritism and metempsychosis is that metempsychosis is the transmigration of soul from one body to another, but it can be from a human to an animal, from a human to another human, and from an animal to a human. And we learn in Spiritism, and again, with logic and reason, that if Spiritism teaches us that the law is of progress, that we are always progressing, it wouldn't make any sense for us to reincarnate in an inferior situation, meaning reincarnating as an animal. The same way we do not reincarnate as a primitive spirit, we reincarnate as a better version of ourselves, that we are always progressing. So that's the big difference between what we are studying nowadays in Spiritism and what metempsychosis or transmigration of the soul, which is what's more used recently, is used. So the concept of reincarnation outside Spiritism, which is also interesting to know, is the philosophical or religious concept that the non-physical essence of a living being begins a new life in a different physical form or body after the biological death, right? So in the beginning was, you find in the religious teachings of the Christian doctrine that you'll find the word resurrection, and even in the Jewish teachings. But resurrection is the concept of coming back to life after death in the same physical body that you just lost. And we know that the physical body disintegrates, so you cannot reassemble the physical body you just left behind. So that's the difference between resurrection and reincarnation. Reincarnation, you are incarnated in a new physical body. The concept of reincarnation is well spread throughout the world. Here in the United States, the latest research shows that 35% more or less of individuals believe in reincarnation. Of course, the vast majority just believe that you'll be born again and have no idea how does it work and what happens in the between, or they think that we wait in a type of a purgatory or heaven or hell. And that's what Spiritism brings different, is the teachings of what happens to the spirit after it leaves the physical body, what happens to the spirit while it is in the spiritual world, and what happens to the spirit in the process of occupying a new physical body, the reincarnation process, and how you are going to, where you are going to be born, and how you are going to deal with the new physical body. So again, what Kardec is telling us here is that Spiritism is not bringing anything new. It's just explaining better. Now, by the end of it, he talks about the different publications at the time of the publication of the Spirit's book that were circulating in various countries and talking about reincarnation, and that some statements of spirits are not in agreement, and that he's going to talk about it later. And we can, knowing a little bit about communications from the spirits, which is something that we are studying with Elmo in the second part in the Medium's book, we know that we cannot trust all communications from the spirits. Kardec received several communications that were discarded, and interesting enough, I was just learning that the French Federation published the first edition of the Spirit's book, the original 517 or 19 questions, and comparing the first edition to the most used, which is the third edition, Kardec added a lot of questions, but even subtracted a couple of questions that you find in the first edition and you don't find in the third edition, because more information received from the spirits our conclusion led him to understand that those questions were either not relevant or were not correct. So the information we receive from spirits, we have always to investigate and to analyze. Okay? Any comments here, questions? Okay, we're going through the whole class without anyone talking besides me and Philip that reads.
For now, we will review this topic with a perspective that is entirely irrespective of any assumed declarations of the spirits. Let us suppose that they made no statement whatsoever in regard to it, and even that the very existence of spirits had not been surmised. Placing ourselves on neutral ground for a moment and admitting the possibility of the hypothesis pertaining to the variety and unity of corporal lives, let us see which of these is most in line with reason and our own interests.
Okay, just let me stress a little bit what Kardec is telling us here, right? So he's going to address the issue of multiple lives, supposing that we never heard from the spirits. Let's go a little bit further. We don't even believe that spirits exist, that they can communicate. So let's place ourselves on neutral ground, meaning I'm not in favor of multiple lives, nor I'm against. One thing that is so difficult for people to do nowadays, which is to put themselves on a neutral position and analyze both sides without any bias. It's very difficult, but that's what Kardec is asking us to do and to follow him on this journey, okay?
There are people who reject the idea of reincarnation simply because they do not like it, declaring that their present life has been quite enough for them and that they have no desire to restart a similar one. We would like to ask these people whether they think that God has asked them their wishes and opinions in regulating the universe. Either the law of reincarnation exists or it does not. If it exists, no matter how displeasing it may be to them, they are compelled to submit to it because God does not ask their permission to enforce it. It is as if a sick person were to say, I have suffered enough today. I do not choose to suffer tomorrow. Regardless of his or her opposition, that person must continue suffering, not only tomorrow, but the day after day, until cured completely. Likewise, if it is their duty, their destiny to live again physically, they will reincarnate and live again. Will it serve them to rebel against necessity in vain, like a child refusing to go to school or a condemned criminal refusing to go to prison? They must submit to their fate, no matter how unwilling they may be to do so. Such objections are too foolish to merit more serious examination. However, in order to reassure them, we will say that the Spiritist doctrine of reincarnation is by no means as terrible as they imagine it to be, and that if they studied it in depth, they would realize that they have nothing to fear. They would understand that each new life depends solely on its own behavior, that they will be happy or unhappy depending on their actions in this present life, and that they may even raise themselves above the danger of falling into the quicksand again due to their actions in this life. We are assuming that those whom we are addressing believe in some sort of afterlife, and that they do not anticipate annihilation or losing their soul to a universal whole, like so many drops of rain in the ocean. If you believe in a future life, you probably do not think that it will be the same for all, because in that case, what would be the point of doing good? Why would human beings exercise any form of self-control? Why should they not satisfy all their passions and desires, even at the expense of the rest of the world, if the result is the same no matter what. If, on the other hand, you believe that the future will be happier or less happy according to what one does in life, wouldn't you want to be as happy as possible in the future, since it will be for eternity?
Okay. So first, Kardec is saying, there are people that reject the idea of reincarnation simply because they don't like it. And to those, he says, the natural laws are there. And if you like or you don't like, if reincarnation exists, you have to face it. But before that, let's just think that either it exists or it does not. If it exists, no matter what you believe, you are going to have to face it. You cannot refuse to do it. Again, we know that there are spirits that postpone and are able to postpone their reincarnation for some time for different reasons, but you cannot completely avoid reincarnation. It is the natural law, so you have to face it. And moreover, Kardec says that if you really reject the idea of reincarnation simply because you don't like it, but you have the belief in the survival of the soul, Kardec recommends study a little bit how Spiritism talks about reincarnation to understand that, if it makes sense or not. As we understand that our future destiny depends on our own behavior, what we do today will have the consequences of our life tomorrow. It just makes sense. We may not like it because it means that we have responsibilities and we have to deal with what we are doing today will have consequences. But we cannot deny that it makes sense, that is logical. And also what Kardec tells us here, that it makes sense that we would preserve our individuality, because if we couldn't preserve our individuality, what would prevent us from acting on our passions and desires, inferior tendencies, at the expense of the rest of the world, if we are going back to the whole, like some believe that the soul loses its individuality when it goes back to the spiritual world. So if that's the case, so why should I try to improve myself if by the end it doesn't really matter? So again, addressing logic and reason, right? It makes sense for us to work on our progress, intellectual and moral progress, because we will be the benefit from it in a future incarnation. If there is no benefit for us, why should we do it? And that's what Kardec is telling us here on the logic of reincarnation in a progressive way, right? In a way that Spiritism teaches us, in keeping everything that we acquire positive in our moral and intellectual evolution. Okay? Any questions, comments here? Apparently not. Let's go. Oh, Danny. Sorry, Danny.
So I just want to understand his argument, right? Allan Kardec is always doing an argument to following, a specific way of thinking. So he's arguing here that if you follow logic and reason, considering that depending on how we behave, we might come back in a better situation and how that can benefit us, that will convince people or that person that there is reincarnation, that is a natural law.
I'm not convinced, but he's asking people to reason, right? To reflect on it, to analyze. What does it make sense, right? So if you are in doubt, again, if you don't believe in reincarnation and you don't want to believe, then it's very difficult to change your ideas, right? But if you have an open mind, thinking, does it exist or does it not? And if it exists, how does it work? That's the argument that he's presenting here, the logic meaning. Yeah, if it exists because you see the difference between us here and what we have acquired in this incarnation helps us moving forward, goes in favor of us working for the progress of ourselves and humanity. If the reincarnation does not exist, if we lose our individuality, then to be a good individual doesn't make any sense, right? That's what he's trying to say here. But you have to start from either from believing in reincarnation, and then this will reinforce your views, or coming from a neutral ground and analyzing impartially the pros and cons of the concept.
So he starts from the principle that the person needs to have an open mind, otherwise the conversation it doesn't even start.
Yeah, because
we talked about that so many times already.
It's and again, because you cannot force anyone to believe in anything, right? But you can present things, and by presenting things, people that have an open mind have to analyze, right? So it's very much similar on what happens nowadays in our society, that we are bombarded with information. A lot of the information is not true. A rational person would look at different sources, would analyze the information and make your own judgment according to the information you are receiving. Again, I'm not saying that the majority of us do this, unfortunately. We take sides and we try to build our beliefs on what we already believe. But what Kardec is asking us to do is to start from neutral position. Right, Luis?
Sorry, but I have to say something. Danny, you were perfect when you identified this as an argument. And I really would like, if you have a chance, that you watch my presentation, I believe on October 2nd, Saturday, where I'm going to talk about the Spiritist philosophy and scientific aspects. And the point being, it's very interesting to know a bit about philosophy, to recognize the way Kardec presents things. And yes, he does, classical philosophy here. He presents a thesis, then an antithesis, then an antithesis in English, then a conclusion, and with that he builds an argument with the objective of convincing us. And you see this all over Kardec's writings, and I find it fantastic. Probably it's one of the first things that attracted me to Spiritism when I read the Spirit's book for the first time. And maybe you'll find this talk interesting. So I had to do some, commercial here of the October 2nd presentation.
Yes, it's good that we do advertisement. Elmo.
Yeah, I think the stated argument that Kardec uses, that Daniela used, is in the reference or is a response to the above quotation over there, it says, it is if a sick person were to say, I have suffered enough today, I do not choose to suffer tomorrow. I think that the argument that Daniela stated over there is in response to that hypothetical question, that your next life is a consequence of your life now, that your next life does not necessarily mean that you're going to suffer again. Because you are sick and suffering now doesn't mean that the next reincarnation, you're going to repeat the same stuff.
Okay. Thanks, Almo. Thanks, Luis. Okay, Danny? Yeah. Okay. So let's see, let's read a little bit more. We won't be able to finish this today. I thought that we wouldn't, but we will restart next week.
Do you consider yourself to be one of the most excellent beings who has ever walked the earth, and that thereby you are entitled to supreme happiness? No? You admit, then, that there are some who are better than you and who consequently are entitled to a higher standing, although you do not deserve to be counted among sinners. Place yourself then for a moment in this situation and imagine that someone comes to you and says, you are suffering, you are not as happy as you could be, and you are seeing others enjoying pure happiness. Would you like to exchange your position for theirs? Of course, you reply. How do I do that? Very simple. All you need to do is redo what you have done badly and try to do it better. Would you hesitate to accept the offer, even at the cost of several lifetimes of trials? Let us look at an even more straightforward example. Imagine that someone approaches a person who, although not completely destitute, is forced to suffer a life of poverty due to a small income, and says to him or her, here is an immense fortune that you can be yours on the condition that you work hard for 1 minute. The laziest person would say without hesitation, I am ready to work for 1 minute, 2 minutes, an hour, a whole day if necessary. What is a day's labor in comparison to the certainty of wealth and comfort for the rest of my life? What is the duration of a corporal life in comparison to eternity? Less than a minute, less than a second.
We're going to stop here on Paco's favorite part of the, he mentioned several times, right? The duration of a corporeal life in comparison to eternity, less than a minute, less than a second. Right, Paco? You love
yes.
that.
I even calculated in terms of the Earth, you know, it's 4 million, and then we are 78.7 years, you know, life expectancy. It came out to a decimal fraction that is really, really minute. You know that?
Exactly. So, you know, again, Kardec is using logic here, right? First, do you consider yourself to be the best one on earth? If we are sincere and honest with ourselves, we don't need to answer, but we know that we're not. There are better persons than us, and there are worse persons than us, both morally and intellectually. So, would you like to be like those that are enjoying pure happiness? And the answer is of course. But, you know, and then if I ask, how do I do that? Well, repair the mistakes you have made, do it better, like that phrase, fail, do it again, fail better. The phrase that someone once told me. You know, it is a trial and errors. We evolve making corrections to on our mistakes, previous mistakes, and also making new mistakes on things that we don't know yet and learning from those mistakes. Remember what we always say, the karma is when you make a mistake and insist on repeating the mistake. Then you create a karma. When you are making a mistake because you didn't know better, you have two choices. You have no idea what's the right, what's the wrong. If you make the right choice, that's fine. If you make the wrong choice, you are going to face the consequences of of the wrong choice, but there is no karma created for that. So that's what Kardec is trying to say. On the other hand, if you have someone that is completely destitute and you tell them, if you work 1 minute hard, you can be very rich, the person is going to say, yes, I can work 1 minute hard. And that's when he brings the idea that one existence is nothing compared to eternity. Again, very, very beautiful in theory, but when we go by with our struggles of our daily lives, it's not very easy to put that inside ourselves as part of who we are. But it's something that we have to remember always, whenever we're facing difficulties, that, the famous phrase from Jesus' mother, everything passes, this will also pass. What she says, on the happy and unhappy moments, we always have to remember that. Okay? We're going to stop here. Next week, we come back to this. And we continue because we still have a good 6 pages here on this philosophical discussions that Kardec is having on the considerations of multiple lives. Okay? Any final comments, questions?
I do not believe that this passage itself, in fact, the other two, are really like logically solid, to tell you the truth. You know, he's claiming that it's pure logic, but this one could say, well, I did wrong and I'm suffering in this afterlife and I deserve that. I deserve that because I did wrong.
Yeah.
So what he's doing is a sales pitch to me, but not logic. Okay. I happen to believe in reincarnation. I'm just looking at it from the perspective of logic. And I don't know if I'm convinced that he's using pure logic there. That's all.
I we
all think differently.
Logical, but let's Luis has been studying this. Is this sales pitch or logic, Luis, in your opinion?
It's a philosophical argument. A philosophical argument is not the same thing as logic. Actually, we do not have a very precise everyday definition of logic. Logic was something that was developed in the beginning of in the 1900s, if my memory doesn't fail me, or in the beginning of the 20th century, and it had the objective, or it was developed by mathematicians, and it planned to be a way to decode thoughts. You would transform sentences and symbols. And once you did that translation, you would totally understand what was being told. Actually, that revealed itself impossible. So logic fell into somewhat a limbo. But people still use the word logic when they refer to a well-structured reasoning. Historically, logic came back with digital technology, with digital electronics. They you know, they brought back the concepts. It became something called Boolean logic, a simplified way of presenting logic. And it's the basis of digital computers as we see today. So I don't think that Kardec was trying to build something logical. He was building an argument by presenting conflicting theses and antitheses,
Yeah, okay.
and
Okay,
trying
that.
to
I
have
like that.
an argument that could convince someone who is
Exactly.
moving.
I like that explanation. Thank you, Luis. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well explained. I
Yeah.
would say.
Yeah.